The young and the restless spoilers shock a fateful encounter in Genoa. The collision of loyalties and deception. The night in Genoa had an almost otherworldly quality, a hush that lay over the city as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something momentous to unfold. Under the dim glow of street lamps and the silver sheen of the moon, Audra found herself standing on the edge of an unforeseen and dangerous meeting. Unbeknownst to her, this encounter would soon send ripples across the delicate tapestry of relationships and power struggles that defined the lives of those in Genoa. Audra's meeting with Holdem was, in every sense, fated, a collision of destinies that none of them had truly anticipated. Holdem, notorious in the undercurrents of Genoa for his slick manipulations and dubious schemes, had earned a reputation as a trickster, a man who could charm his way out of any situation, always managing to escape the dire consequences of his actions. Despite the whispered warnings and the well-known treacheries of his past, Holdem had yet to commit any transgressions severe enough to warrant a firm hand by the law. His freedom, however, came at a steep price. The entire Winters family, along with its two scions Amy and Damien, bore the brunt of his deceit. Their lives had been marred by the fallout of his schemes, leaving scars that ran deep and memories that were painful to recall. Nate, a man of strong principles and unwavering commitment, had long believed that his personal and professional worlds were separate realms of order and integrity. His trust in Audra, his partner and confidant, was unyielding until that night. When word of Audra's meeting with Holdem reached him, Nate was seized by a potent mixture of disbelief and fury. His mind raced with accusations and doubts, each one more damning than the last. How could Audra, the woman he so deeply loved, consort with the very man who had long been the bane of the Winters family and who had repeatedly managed to dodge accountability? In the quiet confines of an upscale Genoa café, where the gentle clink of cutlery was overshadowed by whispered conversations and the rustle of high society, Audra had met Holdem under circumstances that she claimed were entirely coincidental. Her calm demeanor belied the storm of emotions swirling within her. She explained, with a measured tone and earnest eyes, that her encounter with Holdem was nothing more than an unexpected twist of fate, a chance meeting that had arisen when she least expected it. According to her, she had simply crossed paths with him on the bustling streets of Genoa, and what followed was an attempt to persuade him to change course. Audra's words carried a sense of urgency and caution as she implored Holdem to leave Genoa immediately. "If you stay," she warned softly yet firmly, "you will only invite more trouble, not just for yourself, but for everyone caught in the wake of your actions." It was a plea born out of a desire to protect not only the fragile equilibrium of the community but also the delicate bonds of trust and loyalty that defined her own life. Audra had no romantic feelings for Holdem. Her interaction with him was purely a matter of principle, a stand against the pervasive undercurrent of deceit that he represented. Yet Nate's reaction was anything but measured. When confronted with the news of Audra's meeting, he could hardly reconcile the image of the woman he cherished with the idea of her fraternizing with a known adversary. In his eyes, the very act of meeting Holdem was tantamount to infidelity, a betrayal that struck at the very core of his sense of honor and commitment. "You're having an affair," he accused, his voice thick with anger and disbelief. His words were laced with an intensity that reflected both his personal anguish and the broader implications of a breach of trust. To him, the meeting was not a harmless encounter but a signal that Audra's loyalties might be shifting, an act of treachery that could unravel the foundation of their union. However, as the heated exchange unfolded, it became evident that the truth was far more nuanced than Nate's initial assumptions. Audra's steadfast insistence that there was no romance between her and Holdem was underscored by a deep-seated conviction in her own integrity. She was not foolish enough to jeopardize her relationship with Nate, a man whose love and trust she had long honored. Instead, her actions were motivated by a desire to mitigate a growing threat, a threat embodied by Holdem, whose continued presence in Genoa could precipitate even greater chaos if left unchecked. For Audra, the meeting was a calculated risk, one that she took not out of malice or desire but out of necessity. She recognized that Holdem's behavior, though not yet catastrophic, had the potential to spiral out of control. His ability to charm and manipulate, his uncanny knack for evading responsibility, all of these traits made him a ticking time bomb in the volatile environment of Genoa's elite circles. With the Winters family already bearing the scars of his previous exploits, it was imperative that he be dissuaded from further entanglements that could imperil the fragile peace the city had so painstakingly maintained. In this context, Audra's advice to Holdem was both a warning and a lifeline. It was a call to abandon his nefarious pursuits, to recognize that his actions were not only self-destructive but also deeply harmful to those around him. Her words carried the weight of someone who had witnessed the fallout of deceit and betrayal firsthand, a voice of reason amid the swirling chaos of Genoa's social intrigues. "Leave now, before it's too late," she urged him, her tone a blend of compassion and stern resolve. Yet Nate, blinded by his own hurt and the sting of perceived betrayal, struggled to see the situation in its full light. His insistence on interpreting the encounter as an affair was not merely an emotional outburst, it was a manifestation of his deep-seated fears about losing the one person who had always been his anchor. The specter of infidelity, whether real or imagined, threatened to upend the delicate balance of trust that had long defined their relationship. Nate's inability to accept Audra's explanation, his desperate clinging to the notion of betrayal, only deepened the fissure between them, casting long shadows over what had once been a solid foundation of mutual respect and love. As the night wore on and the city of Genoa began to stir with the promise of a new day, the repercussions of that fateful encounter were only just beginning to take shape. Holdem, though outwardly unrepentant and unfazed, found himself caught in a web of growing hostility. The Winters family's loathing for him, compounded by the distress of Amy and Damien, who had suffered at his hands, was a potent force that could not be ignored. Their collective pain and desire for retribution were harbingers of future conflicts that promised to test the loyalties and resolve of every character entangled in this unfolding drama. In the midst of this turmoil, Audra's role emerged as one of reluctant mediator and unwitting catalyst. Her efforts to steer Holdem away from further misdeeds were driven by a profound understanding of the destructive potential of unchecked ambition and deceit. Yet, in doing so, she had inadvertently placed herself at the crossroads of suspicion and misunderstanding. Nate's mistrust, fueled by his own vulnerabilities, threatened to engulf their relationship in a maelstrom of doubt and resentment. A predicament that could, if left unresolved, irreparably damage the bonds they had spent years building. The narrative that was slowly weaving itself in Genoa was one of contrasts, loyalty versus betrayal, love versus duty, and the perennial struggle between personal integrity and the allure of forbidden alliances. In this intricate dance of emotions and ambitions, every character was forced to confront their deepest fears and desires. For Audra, the encounter was a test of her resolve, a moment where her commitment to protecting those she cared about was pitted against the harsh realities of a world where trust was a rare commodity. Nate, on the other hand, faced an internal battle that transcended the immediate incident. His accusations, though seemingly rooted in personal betrayal, were also a reflection of his inner turmoil, a clash between the image he held of a steadfast partner and the unsettling possibility that everything he believed in might be an illusion. His journey from anger and suspicion toward a place of understanding, if such a transformation were even possible, would require a reckoning with his own insecurities and a willingness to see beyond the surface of what his heart perceived as betrayal. As dawn broke over Genoa, casting long shadows on the cobbled streets and illuminating the faces of those who had been forever changed by that night, the city itself seemed to exhale a collective sigh. The encounter between Audra and Holdem was a turning point, a moment that underscored the precarious balance between choice and consequence. It was a vivid reminder that in the world they inhabited, nothing was ever as simple as it seemed, and every decision carried the potential to ignite a chain reaction of events that could redefine destinies. In the end, the fateful meeting was not an act of infidelity or treachery but rather a complex interplay of circumstance, duty, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Audra's clear-headed advice to Holdem to leave Genoa before he spiraled further into trouble was an embodiment of her desire to protect all those caught in the crossfire of deceit. It was a message that resonated deeply with anyone who had ever faced the painful reality of betrayal and the difficult choices that must be made in its aftermath. While Nate's suspicions and the ensuing conflict may have clouded the immediate aftermath, the truth would eventually emerge from the tangled web of emotions and misunderstandings. In time, the people of Genoa would come to realize that sometimes, the most challenging battles are fought not against external enemies, but within the hearts and minds of those who dare to love and trust in a world where loyalty is constantly tested. Thus, the fateful encounter of that night was etched into the annals of Genoa's history, a poignant chapter marked by both sorrow and hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, the light of truth and integrity can guide one through the labyrinth of deception. A web of secrets, the past that haunts Audra and the reckoning that follows Genoa City had always been a place where secrets lurked in the shadows, where the past never truly stayed buried. But for Audra, the arrival of Holdem was more than just an unwelcome ghost from her past, it was an impending disaster waiting to explode. The air between them crackled with an unspoken history, a connection that neither of them dared to admit openly. And yet, the more they tried to conceal it, the more obvious it became. Audra had always been a woman of control, polished, strategic, and fiercely independent. She had built a life of power and influence, carefully curating the image of a woman who had everything under control. But Holdem was the one person who could unravel all of it. His presence was like a ticking time bomb, each second bringing her closer to an inevitable reckoning. The shadow of the past, there was no denying it anymore. Audra and Holdem had a complicated past, one far deeper than what anyone in Genoa suspected. They were more than just former acquaintances. There had been trust. There had been intimacy. And now, there was betrayal. Holdem was a master manipulator, a man who thrived on chaos and deception. His entire life was built on exploiting weaknesses, and Audra's carefully constructed world was a weakness he was more than happy to dismantle. Unlike others who had merely suffered his scams and walked away with financial losses, Audra was different. She wasn't just another mark. She had once been his ally. Maybe even something more. And that was exactly why Holdem wasn't letting go so easily. His presence in Genoa City wasn't a coincidence, it was calculated. He had come for her. And she knew it. A growing fear ever since Holdem resurfaced, Audra had been living in a state of constant anxiety. Her usual poise was slipping, her nerves fraying at the edges. She was always looking over her shoulder, expecting him to appear at any moment, to whisper threats wrapped in nostalgia, to remind her of the things she wanted to forget. The fear gnawed at her, keeping her awake at night. She had worked too hard to escape the past, to carve out a new existence, to be with Nate. But Holdem wasn't going to let her forget. He was the living embodiment of all her past sins, a relentless reminder that no matter how much she tried to change, the ghosts would always follow. Audra hated him for it. And yet, deep down, she feared him even more. Holdem wasn't just back to taunt her, he was here to destroy everything she had built. He wanted to see her suffer, to make sure she paid for whatever had transpired between them in the past. And worst of all? He was winning. Nate's growing suspicion Nate wasn't a fool. He was a man of instinct, of calculated decisions, and he had always been good at reading between the lines. From the moment Holdem appeared in Genoa, Nate had sensed something off about the way Audra reacted to him. She was tense, evasive, constantly looking for an excuse to avoid discussing him. Whenever Holdem's name came up, her demeanor would shift, her voice tightening, her hands clasping just a little too hard, her eyes darting away as if she feared what might be revealed if she met his gaze. Nate had given her the benefit of the doubt at first. He had wanted to believe her. But Audra's desperation to downplay her connection with Holdem only confirmed his worst suspicions. He started watching her more closely, paying attention to the way she spoke, the way she moved, the way she seemed restless whenever she thought no one was looking. And then there were the late-night phone calls, the hushed conversations, the way she would suddenly tense up whenever he asked too many questions. It wasn't just coincidence. It wasn't paranoia. It was the truth, staring him right in the face. The confrontation that broke everything when Nate finally confronted her, there was no room for her usual smooth explanations, no clever distractions or well-rehearsed denials. Because the truth was already there, hanging between them like a blade poised to strike. You lied to me. Nate's voice was low, steady, but beneath it, rage burned. You knew Holdem. You knew him better than you ever admitted. And yet, you stood there, looking me in the eye, and told me you had nothing to hide. Audra opened her mouth, but no words came. Because what could she say? That yes, Holdem was once a part of her life? That they had shared secrets, possibly even love, before things had turned sour? That she had wanted to escape from him, but somewhere, deep inside, she had never truly been free? She knew nothing she said would change the truth. And Nate did, too. His eyes were full of betrayal, of disappointment, of something deeper than mere anger. It was the look of a man who had given someone his heart, only to watch it shatter into pieces at his feet. You told me you weren't hiding anything, Nate whispered, his voice heavy with hurt. But all along, you were just waiting for the past to catch up with you. Audra tried to reach for him, tried to explain, tried to salvage what was left of them. Nate, but he stepped back. Shaking his head, he gave her one last look, a look that said it was over. And then, just like that, he walked away. Leaving Audra alone, with nothing but the wreckage of her lies and the suffocating weight of Holdem's return. The aftermath, a love destroyed as Nate disappeared into the night, Audra felt something in her chest tighten, a crushing emptiness where his love had once been. She had lost him. For good. Holdem had won. And now, all that was left was the past that would never let her go.